Hello, and welcome to the Religion Unplugged podcast, your one-stop shop for all the best religious news and culture. I'm your host, Joseph Holmes, Religion Unplugged culture critic, and with me today is Salvador Litvak. Sal is a filmmaker, author, and content creator behind such films as When Do We Eat and Saving Lincoln, and the book Let My People Laugh, the Greatest Jewish Jokes of All Time. He and his wife, Nina, who also co-creates with him his films and with him under the banner of their production company, Pictures from the Fringe, share Jewish wisdom, humor, and history with over 1 million followers at the Accidental Talmudist website. Their latest film is Guns and Moses, a religious thriller set in the Jewish community, out online October 14th. Sal, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Joseph. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for people who haven't heard of the Guns and Moses movie and haven't seen it, tell us a bit about it. What is it about and what was the inspiration for it?
So this is a big screen, edge of your seat thriller about a rabbi who's forced to become an unlikely gunfighter after his community is violently attacked, starring Mark Feuerstein, Neil McDonough, the legendary Christopher Lloyd, and Dermot Mulroney, among others. It's not the story of this real life event, but it was inspired by it. There was a shooting at a synagogue in Poway, California in 2019. Terrible thing. A shooter came in during the 8th day of Passover services, murdered a woman, Lori Gilbert Kay. The rabbi courageously, tried to intervene and stop and talk this guy down, and the rabbi got his fingers shot off. And then the gun miraculously jammed, saving many lives. They chased him out, and eventually this guy was caught in standing trial. I went down the next day and attended the funeral and interviewed the rabbi for our Jewish Wisdom platform, Accidental Talmudist. And in his pain, he still, in his public appearances, and he became a national figure in those ensuing days, called on people to do something good, something righteous, in memory of Lori, so that something decent could come out of that tragedy. And many people took up that challenge and did mitzvahs, fulfilled their obligations, fulfilled commandments, gave to charity, sponsored organizations, etc., in memory of Lori. We're very inspired by that. And so in our movie, which does begin with a murder at a synagogue event, but they don't catch the guy, right? They find the murder weapon in the trunk of a car owned by a young, very troubled teen, anti-Semite who's made horrible anti-Semitic remarks in the past. And they find the murder weapon in his car. So it's an open and shut case, but it doesn't smell right to the rabbi. And since the police won't investigate, he becomes the detective. And as he gets closer to the truth, the danger absolutely skyrockets. The rabbi is not a gun guy. And this is very much from my own experience. I didn't grow up around guns in New York. I moved out to California. I wasn't very religious as a kid, but I became an Orthodox Jew as an adult, which is to say a visible Jew. I wear a kippah when I go to shul, when I go to synagogue. On Saturdays, I'm wearing a black suit, a black hat. I'm a visible Jew. And the threat level to Jews in America has been rising steadily long before October 7th. So in fact, we wrote this movie about Jews under attack who fight back and shot it in December 2022 before October 7th. We knew that Jews under attack who fight back would always be relevant, but we never imagined a horror like that day. The worst day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust ended, nor this explosion of brazen, overt, anti-Semitism, too soft a word, Jew hatred. These people just feel comfortable shouting it from the rooftops and calling for the murder of Jews around the world. And so even before this had happened, that level was rising. I joined an organization, volunteer organization called Magen Am, Shield of the Nation, that trains and licenses regular guys like me to be volunteers who carry. And I wish it wasn't necessary. And please God, we should never need such skills. But we also will not be a soft target. And sadly, it's not just Jews who are facing this danger in America. You recently had shooters enter churches and in a Catholic school. I mean, the most recent one, this guy had anti-Semitic remarks written on his gear. 6 million wasn't enough. And because of his anti-Semitism, he went to kill Catholic children. I mean, it's insane. There's just psychos among us. And, you know, we have good people of the world have to be prepared to stand up. Not everybody is going to get armed. That's not everybody's role. But some of us have to. Some of us have to be warriors. And I thought, why not me? I'm a responsible guy. I'm not a Yahoo. I certainly, you know, but I think a common sense and consensus view would be that people who have guns should be very well trained in how to use them. And that's something that we show in the movie. As the rabbi learns, it's not the typical montage of a bunch of tin cans on a fence. And 15 seconds later, the guy can shoot. The rabbi goes through proper firearms training. But I think specifically to Religion Unplugged and your show and your audience, you know, the traditional Jewish response to danger is not just let's get armed and fight back. That's 1/3 of the response, right? So we learn it from Jacob, our forefather Jacob, when he faced a confrontation with his twin brother, Esau, Asaph in Hebrew, who, as far as Jacob knew, was coming with 400 armed men to finally exact his revenge for the events that happened 20 years before. And so what did Jacob do? He did 3 things, and this is the traditional Jewish response to danger. You pray to God for assistance, attempt diplomacy, and in that case it worked out, and prepare for war. And we have to do all 3. And that's what the rabbi does in Guns N' Moses.
Yeah, that was so much and a lot to unpack there. And for those of you who haven't read my review of the movie yet on the website, by the time this is up, it will be up on the website. I loved the film. And again, it's one of those things where it's got everything that I love in it. Again, I'm a faith guy, you know, I'm a Christian. I love, you know, conversations about faith. I love stories that are talking about deep, relevant issues. And of course, I love action movies. And you very rarely see all of those things packaged together in one movie, particularly in the way you did it. But you're dealing with, you know, deep topics of anti-Semitism, you know, the angry young men phenomenon, the, you know, questions of how do you respond when, you know, your specific group is under attack, whatever that group is, religious or racial, but particularly in the context of the Jewish community, because that's what you're talking about. But anything you do about Holocaust remembrance, there's an amazing scene with one of my favorite recent scenes by Christopher Lloyd that I've seen, where he's a Holocaust survivor talking about his memories of that situation. Now, what I'm wondering is, like, why did you decide to do this movie this way? Because typically when you have an inspiration for a story that's a real life tragic event, doing it as a neo-Western detective thriller isn't what most people go to. And certainly the doing a lot of, you know, faith and stuff like that is not the first place people go to. But I want to talk about, like, why did you decide to tackle these issues, these conversations in this kind of genre format?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the truth is, we had decided to make our next movie. Let's start with that. We had decided to make our next movie. Like you said, my wife and I write together, I direct. We made a Passover comedy that became a cult classic, When Do We Eat? We made a movie about Abraham Lincoln and his closest friend, Ward Hill Lamon. There's a very strong faith component. If you look at the meditation on the divine will in the midst of the Civil War, Lincoln, you know, asking God, why this terrible calamity of death in our country, and me at the head of it, who couldn't wring the neck of a chicken, sending all these boys to die, and wrestling with these kinds of issues. Then what happened is our Jewish wisdom platform, Accidental Talmudist, happened. It really was accidental. That's a whole other story. But I never expected to be sharing Jewish wisdom with 1 million followers on Facebook and a few 100,000 more on Instagram. Really, God put that in my path, and we are communicators, and we can maybe share in a way. I'm not a rabbi. I'm saying that all the time. I'm not a rabbi, but I'm able to share sort of Jewish teachings in a way that a rabbi wouldn't, and the audience seems to enjoy it. And we were so busy building that platform that we hadn't made a movie in a few years, and our artistic bug, which we do express on Accidental Talmudist with short videos, but at the end of the day, we love movies and we make movies. It was time to make our next movie. So we knew it would have a Jewish subject because of this large audience and who we are and stuff that we care about. And I wanted to make a thriller. So before we knew what the subject would be, we knew that we were going to make a Jewish thriller. And to prepare to make a thriller, we set up a projector and a screen in our living room and watched a thriller a day for 2 years. We just love the genre. It's my favorite genre. Looking at the greats, at Hitchcock, at De Palma, at Friedkin, Clouseau, Polanski, and just seeing what makes these movies tick. And anybody who wants to make movies, another thing I recommend always to young filmmakers is watch a movie that you love with the sound off. And then you'll really see what that director was doing from shot to shot. And so we learned, how do we find so many of those thrillers? From lists, the 50 greatest thrillers of all time, greatest foreign thrillers, 100 greatest thrillers, those kinds of lists. And we really wanted to make a movie that could take its place on such a list. And it was during that period that this shooting happened at that synagogue in Poway. And it was during that period that I joined Maganam and learned to shoot. And so, we were looking to do a thriller, and then it was these, elements that are so important to us in our lives that got expressed through a thriller. Right. It wasn't that we chose a thriller to tell that story.
That's so fascinating. That really makes a lot of sense. You were wanting to do a thriller, and then you were looking for the heart of it. And real life gave that in a very tragic way. Where it's like, well, this is what would be relevant to talk about with this. That makes a lot of sense. Now, a couple of questions on this. One is about kind of, the faith and genre of this. Why do you think that there haven't been very many kind of, religious thrillers made? Why do you think that, there's been a thriving-ish, faith-based industry on the Christian side for, past 20 years, but they don't really go into that genre very much. And there's a lot of potential reasons for that. But why do you think that it's difficult to find people talking about, from a religious perspective, themes of violence in this kind of way? Obviously, there's Hollywood films that kind of talk about religion and violence sort of from the outside, but this is very much a movie from the inside of believers doing this. Why do you think that that's so rare for this genre and the faith world to mix in this way?
Because it's so difficult to do, honestly. If you look at Hollywood, this is a godless place. I mean, let's just be frank about it. It is a godless place. Of course, there are exceptions. There's some wonderful people here that their faith is an important part of their lives. But there's so many more that it's not. Hollywood sold it so long ago and will just put out any kind of dreck to make a buck. Certainly the way they exploit nudity, totally unnecessary in so many movies. They just add the scene, because they'll make some more money doing that. And it's funny, these days, the Hollywood cocktail parties, right, where they're so scared of their interns and being canceled by their interns, it's a brave statement to say that God made the world, God runs the world. We all need to be of service to each other and to God, and that there are eternal truths, commandments that were given in the Bible that apply to all of us. That's not something that Hollywood gets behind. And so if you go out on a limb and make such a movie, it's a huge risk. We're seeing the dangers of it right now. You look at our movie, which is about Jews under attack who fight back. I mean, is after President Trump himself, is that maybe the second or third most, common story in the media in the past couple of years?
It couldn't be more timely. Regardless of what you think of it, it couldn't be more timely.
Exactly. It could not be more timely. Our level of cast, I mean, Neil McDonough is just a huge, huge star. His movie, The Rodeo for Angel Studios this year was a big movie. And
one of my favorites this year. Yeah.
Thank you. A great movie, great actor, such a pro, so great to work with, so generous.
In everything he does, elevates it.
Exactly. Christopher Lloyd, I mean, Mark Feuerstein, Jake Busey, Craig Schaefer kind of making his comeback, Mercedes Mason, Alona Tal, really, high level cast, taut thriller, exciting movie, and coming out in this climate. And we didn't have a Hollywood marketing budget of $10 million, but it was enough that, we had 50 articles written about us, social media, millions and millions and millions of impressions, a movie with our footprint. You would expect on Rotten Tomatoes at least 100 reviews and probably 200. Especially in this climate with its timeliness factor.
Right.
It has 10 critic reviews. The legacy media, if you're off narrative, if you're talking about faith, if you're talking about guns, if you're talking about Jews right now in this climate, very dangerous. And they will just shun you. They can't give it bad reviews, terrible reviews, because they're smart enough to know it's a good movie. And so they just ignore it. And that really hurts us in terms of just getting out there to the public and hearing about us. And so our initial release in July, it went terrible. We were supposed to have 300 theaters. We only got 77 theaters. Now, everyone said, yeah, it's the superhero movies. The superhero movies are doing much better this year than they usually do. You can't get screens. They used to open on 2,000 theaters. Now they open 4,000 theaters, multiple rooms and multiplexes. So sorry, there's no real estate for you. But really, people didn't hear about Guns N' Moses the way they normally would have a movie like this with its footprint. And yet, word of mouth got out there. The word of mouth is what saves a movie like ours, because people talk, and when they see something good and recommend it to their friends, you can't stop that. And it was this outcry.
I know that if I know there's a movie that's good that my friends will like, I want them to know about it because my status gets raised as somebody who knows good movies. So people will spread the word around. Yes,
exactly. And that outcry from the public is what brought our movie back as a Fathom event. Now, Fathom, a wonderful organization that sort of uses the theaters Sunday to Thursday when there's a little bit less people there. And they do, usually 2-day, 3-day releases of classic movies, occasionally new movies. But in their 20-year history, they've never elevated a movie that was just released to a Fathom event nationwide. We actually never left theaters. We've been playing in Florida all this time. And yet now, right this week, as we're talking, 500 screens across the country. And it's all from the people. We want to see Guns N' Moses. And it's because it just doesn't fit in a box. It's exactly what you said. A faith-based thriller, detective mystery. You just haven't seen it before.
I think that you make an excellent point, which is that legacy media outlets and personalities, let's say, are very risk averse. And, a movie about religious violence, like post 9/11, is a risky thing to talk about. And certainly, people, the controversy, post October 7th has only gotten, worse in terms of, having these conversations about just being uncomfortable with somebody who is distinctly religious using violence for whatever reason, even if you write yourself into pretzels to make it justified in any other circumstance, and it's a similar kind of with racial things where if you want to have, somebody who's fighting back on racial basis. Although they're a little bit more comfortable with that nowadays, post Get Out world. But
as long as the right color is the bad guy and the right color is
there is that. Yes, there is that. Yes, no doubt about that. But you're right, the risk averse aspect, and this is definitely a movie that doesn't fit into a box in that way. Another way that this doesn't fit into a box that I'm really interested in for you to speak about is, obviously, I'm a Christian, but I write about faith-based movies all the time, and I try to write about more than just my own faith in terms of representations of movies. This is Religion Unplugged, not Christianity Unplugged.
Right.
And one of the things that I've noticed is that in a lot of the movies that are about Jewish culture from the perspective of, Jews and Jewish artists, tends to focus on the cultural aspect of Judaism rather than the personal faith aspect of Judaism. And of course, obviously, there's different Jews, and Jewish identity is complex, and there are some Jews like you portray in a movie who have it as a cultural identity rather than a religious identity. But I find that very interesting in contrast to, it's almost the exact opposite of Christian kind of faith-based movies, for lack of a better word, that downplay cultural distinctiveness of Christian culture, even though there's plenty of distinctives of Christian subculture you could do if you wanted. They tend to downplay that a lot and focus almost exclusively on the personal relationship with God aspect of it. And I'm wondering, just as a very religious, Jewish filmmaker, why you think that has been largely the trend for Jewish filmmakers to focus on the cultural aspects of Judaism rather than the faith religious aspects of Judaism in the films?
Great question. The first level simple answer is because I'm probably the only Shomer Shabbos, which is to say Sabbath observant, which is to say Orthodox religious Jewish director ever in Hollywood. Okay, there's a lot of Jewish directors, and they're not religious Jews, and so our movie shot from Sunday to Thursday because I had to keep Shabbos and I can't be working on Saturday. So that's a simple answer. It's just it's not their interest, right? They don't know about it. They don't care about it. It's not who they are.
You write what you know from their perspective, and their perspective is of a non-religious,
Exactly.
Jew.
But at a deeper level, it's very interesting because we sort of say Judeo-Christian heritage, Jews and Christians, as if there are tremendous similarities and so much commonality. We're cousins, so to speak.
Right.
But when you say a Christian, by definition, you're talking about somebody who's somewhat religious, right? To say that you're a Christian means that you're engaged in a relationship with God. Right. You're reading scripture.
You're not sticking around if you're not. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what it means to be a Christian. I guess you could be a lapsed Christian or something like that, but
there's some Catholics maybe who go because it's part of their cultural, but
right.
Yes,
but if you
predominantly,
exactly,
yeah.
If you call yourself a Christian, it's because religion is an important part of your life. If you call yourself a Jew, that's not necessarily so at all. Because now we're not just a religion. There's a religion that's part of being a Jew, that is Judaism, that's being the Torah, the commandments, etc. But by definition, you're a Jew if your mother was a Jew. And so there's definitely this cultural component that does not necessarily go hand in hand. That's why we don't like the word, by the way, Orthodox. That's a very recent word. We use it so that people know what we're talking about. But that word only came into existence in the last couple hundred years, which is like, a second ago in Jewish history. In 3,000 years, 200 years is nothing. But it was a response to, frankly, a very, very dangerous and awful thing that happened in Jewish history, which was the birth of the Reform movement in Germany 200 years ago, which said that, we're going to change all the rules, and that the obligations that God said, you're a Jew, this is what you're obligated to do. In Jewish history, there were many people who didn't follow all the rules, but they didn't say it's okay not to follow the rules. They're like, okay, I should do better. This idea that some leaders who call themselves rabbis said, no, we're going to do away with most of the commandments, and we're actually going to imitate the Christians in Germany, and we're going to have synagogues that are like churches, and you just go one day a week and then eat what you want and do what you want, and you don't have to pray daily, etc. That was a radical and dangerous and terrible innovation. And so orthodoxy was just to say, no, that's wrong, and we're going to do what we've always done. But a much better word is traditional. But, as I say, when we're talking about Hollywood, right, these are not religious people. I think if you're talking about the non-Jews, very few of them are Christians either. It's just something that is inconvenient to them. It hampers their lifestyle to say that there are eternal values, and that you have a debt to the widow and to the orphan and to the poor one here, that you have to take care of him, that there's something going on in this society, that you have a debt to your family, that you have to be a better man than, at the end of the day, you need to be a better man than you were that morning and a better man tomorrow. And that takes a lot of work, to become the people that we have the potential to be. I always, I teach a lot. You can hear it on Accidental Talmudists. And, my movies, I have to entertain. That's my job as a director, but I can't help but put some of these lessons in it. What is the first commandment that God gave us, that God gave the world? When you ask people that, Joseph, what is the first commandment?
Well, there's if you're talking about, I know that the trick here, you're doing it's not the first in the 10 commandments.
Correct.
The first is in Genesis. My first thing is to wanting to say, be fruitful and multiply.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'm not mistaken there. That's the one.
Very good. You know your Bible. That is the first commandment. Now, what's so interesting about be fruitful and multiply is that it's normally understood to mean have children, right? And in Jewish tradition, a man is obligated to have children. He fulfills that obligation, according to one view, when he's had 2 sons, according to another view, when he's had a son and a daughter. And the law actually is when he's had a son and a daughter. Women are not obligated because in the ancient world, it was dangerous. So a woman should volunteer to have a child. And obviously men need women to have children, but they're not obligated the way men are actually obligated. But if it only meant have children, it would have sufficed to say multiply. Even before multiply is be fruitful. So the question is, what does bear fruit mean? And it's a wonderful question, because if you think about it, it's what we were sent into this world to do, right? Each of us has a unique mission. There's a fruit that only will be born if we bear it, right? There's a problem that won't get solved unless I solve it. There's a project that won't get created unless you create it. There's a job that won't get done unless he does it, right? And each of us has to keep asking that question: what was I sent into this world to do? And if you keep asking, the answer will come into focus. Too many people go through life, never ask that question. What is my mission? What is the unique contribution that I can make? And so I think, since I do ask myself that question all the time, it would have been so much less risky, so much easier to just make a straight up thriller, about a guy who witnesses a crime. It happens in his community. The cops won't solve it, so he does it. And there's no faith component of it, and it's just a straight up thriller. It could have been very exciting, very good movie. We'd have 200 reviews. We'd make a lot more money, much easier to get our return to our investors. But it just wasn't in my heart to do that. These are the issues that we care about. And so as artists, we're going to do what we care about so much. And I think that these eternal questions are eternal. And that's why, some of these straight up movies that make a lot of money today, who's going to hear about them in 20 years? But our first movie, When Do We Eat? Very similar, a very dysfunctional family comedy, but newly religious son brings some of these eternal teachings into the home, and it ends up making a difference over the course of this Passover dinner, this family holiday dinner. And it came out with some other big Hollywood comedies at the same time that made a lot more money. No one even remembers what those movies are. They've never been watched. Our movie gets watched year after year after year, a little bit like the Jewish It's a Wonderful Life. So I think if you do what people really care about, what their souls are longing, those kinds of questions to answer. People recognize that, and slowly but surely, your movie gets seen by a wide audience.
That's awesome. So just got a couple more questions for you about this. One is working with, you got to work with some amazing actors, like we've talked about a bunch of them a lot, obviously Christopher Lloyd and Neil McDonough. What, was that partnership like to work with these people? Obviously, Neil McDonough is, a Catholic, but he's got his own faith-based organization wanting to do these kinds of films that are, about being a better child of God, I think is how he put it. So what were those kind of partnerships like, working with these, just this amazing kind of cast and partners?
I was very fortunate. This was a tough shoot. It was a really tough shoot. If Hollywood makes a movie like Guns N' Moses, which had a lot of action, one of the things we noticed when watching that thriller a day for 2 years is how little action a lot of those movies have. And I said, well, listen, we're going to make a tough subject. It's not going to be easy for us. We got to have an amazing trailer. That means it's got to have a lot of action in it. That means that action has to be baked into the story. So if Hollywood was making this movie, they have 3 months. It'd be a 3-month shoot minimum. And with that much action, probably 3.5 and maybe even 4 months. We had 1 month, which is 20 shooting days in 4 weeks. And half of those days had action, which has its own requirements. So what that means is, on a schedule like that, if the actors aren't prepared, understand their character, know their lines, they certainly have questions for me that I'm answering on the set, but we can't be working out basic stuff. I was once I had the privilege of visiting. I guess I won't say which movie, but it was one of the Marvel movies. $100 million budget. And one of the actors, great actor, it was his first day on the set. And he had questions for the director. And so this, 80, 100 people are all sitting down, doing nothing. Producers are going insane. I mean, this is costing $100,000 a minute or something. And the actor and the director are talking for 2 hours, just figuring out, character issues while the whole, Marvel machinery is down. Something like that would have sunk us. In fact, so much so that I realized on day one that our schedule was so tough that just in the normal way of shooting, we weren't going to make it. And I had to do something radical. And what I did is I stopped saying cut. Because when you say cut on a movie set, so every department rushes in. Costume, makeup, lights, sound, tweak the microphone, tweak the light, tweak the shade, and make little adjustments. That means it's 10 minutes before you can get back up again to do the, take 2. We didn't have that luxury. So I would just say, that was great. Back to position 1. Mark, I need you to do this. Neil, could you do it a bit like that? Camera was a little bit to the right. Ready? Action. And that's how we got through it. For that kind of thing to work, the actors have to have tremendous faith in the director and in what we're trying to do, and be on board and be part of the team. And they were. It was such a blessing to work with that cast. Mark Forresty, let me talk about him, who plays Rabbi Mo. Such a sweet guy, so committed. And I matched him with several Chabad rabbi friends. He was playing a Chabad rabbi. Chabad is a particular type of Hasidic Judaism that sends, rabbis to make little synagogues all around the world to make Judaism available to the Jews wherever they are. And there's a sweetness to them. And Mark, really connected with the rabbis I matched him with, and sort of picked up their manner, their intonation, their rhythm of speech, and made it his own. And again, that kind of preparation made it possible to move so fast and effectively on set.
That's amazing. So if people do watch, you're hoping people do watch this film, and I definitely recommend people do, because it's just a really good film, and it's a really good film that does things that films don't typically do, combining elements, the thriller, again, the entertainment, the action, the religion, and also the deep social commentary that you don't see all together in this way. And I've been waiting for people to see all this way. I guess I'll just, very brief soapbox. I'm not going to spoil the scene, but the scene where it's that third act conversation between Rabbi Moses and the young man, is the moment I said, oh, I love this movie. Because that's the moment where faith and the story and the characters and the action of the story all came together. And it's, again, you rarely see stories that talk about the redemption of faith and actively redeeming faith, while also saying, well, how do you actually stop evil that won't become your friend?
Yeah.
And movies that do both of that and have an answer to that. And you don't have to agree with the answer necessarily, but it is a plausible answer to that question, I think are very rare, especially ones that are enjoyable to watch. So I really liked the movie for that reason. But if you could speak to what you would like people to get out of this movie, when they do see it, what would that be?
Well, first of all, thank you for pointing to that scene. It is very much the heart of the movie. The rabbi visits this young white nationalist that nobody else thinks is innocent except the rabbi. And the rabbi comes to believe in the kid. And the kid who's learned to hate Jews by reading crap online and now actually meets a living, breathing Jewish man, and things change. But in the midst of the rabbi's journey, he makes mistakes and he gets attacked and he thinks, who the hell am I to think that I could solve a crime? I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And the kid says, well, you think God made you wrong, left out something you're supposed to have? Because if you don't believe in me, if you can't solve this, I'm never getting out of here and I can't survive in here. And the rabbi says, the rabbi says, look, God, I believe in. Me, not so much, right? And I think that's such an important moment because, and that's why this movie is so very much for all people of faith. It's certainly not just for Jews. When Christians see this movie, I mean, we've seen it over and over again. They really respond so positively to it. But that's one that we don't often find, right? So many faith journeys are about, I was lost, I found God, and then I found my way back. But it's not so easy, right? Many of us have found God and we still have troubles, it's not so simple. I saw a video just this morning, this young lady, she said a great thing, right? She said, when God decided to make David king, he didn't send him a crown, he sent him Goliath. when he made Moses a leader, he didn't give him a stage, he gave him rebellious people and Pharaoh chasing him with chariots. I mean, in our lives of faith, it doesn't mean that once we find God, things get easy. Very often they get much more difficult. But what we see is purpose, is meaning. Right. And then we start to see how the events of our lives, all of us, are a story being told. We're not prophets. So God doesn't speak to us in the language of words, but he's constantly speaking to us in the language of events. And we have to tune in to that language. And I think that in this movie, the rabbi's tuned into that language. People around him start to tune into that language. And then they have to go out and do the work. Right? They have to go out and do the work and they have to confront evil and they have to, prepare and do the best that they can and lean on each other. And then, like in so many classic Westerns, right? It's that group of misfits leaning on each other with some very heavily armed and organized people coming their way. But they're resourceful. They trust God. They may not all survive. But by God, they're going to do the best that they can, and they're going to stand up and fight against evil.
All right. And I know that I said that was the last question, but one more question for, for listeners who are wrestling in their own lives with how do you find that balance between protecting yourself from people who want to do you harm? Like you do this, you have one of the characters say, look, if your enemy says they want to kill you, believe them. Yeah. But one thing the rabbi does, he says, I still want to reach out for redemption in here. How have you perhaps in your life, and how do you talk about people finding that balance between trying to protect yourself from being harmed by evil and protect your loved ones from being harmed by evil and stopping evil so it can't hurt anybody else, while also trying to be a force of redemption in the world? What have you come to that's looked like for you, and that you would advise people who are wrestling with that themselves?
Yeah, I think there's no contradiction there. I think you have to do both. I think part of sort of waging spiritual warfare in this world is to do it on all these different fronts. There is a physical war against genuine evil that is going on in our time. It may in some ways worse than it's ever been in our lifetimes. But also there's so many good people in the world. There's so many allies in this fight. There's so many people who are not falling prey to obvious lies that are getting repeated and parroted and amplified. If you talk about the lies about the Middle East, anybody with common sense can look at a map and see that Israel is this tiny sliver in a vast landmass, curvature of the earth, of the other folks in that region, and say, obviously, this is not the colonizer, right? So if people are saying that, there are lies. So you have to have that truth sense, and you have to get your news from multiple sources. That's another part.
Amen.
If you're going to wage spiritual warfare, you got to know what the facts are. You got to know who the enemies are, actually. But building bridges, breaking bread with people, getting to know them, what they care about, what their problems are, what they're trying to do. So much changes in Guns N' Moses when the rabbi walks over and offers a brownie to somebody who has talked hatred to him. Now, the rabbi, by the end of the movie, he's carrying a gun. And he will still walk over and offer the brownie. And it's like to our enemies, have the brownie with us. If you're going to try and kill me and kill my family, we will protect ourselves. We will not be a soft target. But we would rather break bread with you. And then the third front in that war always is internal, right? Internal. I mean, all of us could do better. All of us make mistakes. Right now, as we're speaking, Joseph, it's the end of the Hebrew year. Rosh Hashanah is approaching. And in this Hebrew month of Elul, the last month of the year, our sages teach that God is in the field, right? The king is in the field. And that means that he's closer than ever. I mean, God is everywhere. We're in God. God is some old man in the sky, this very juvenile vision. We are inside God. But God makes God's self more available to us at this time of the year. And perhaps the reason for that is because we're tasked in this period with examining our own deeds and making a spiritual accounting. What did I do right last year? And what did I do wrong? What needs improvement? And if I've identified something that I could do better, it's not just, and I want to do better, God help me do better. It's, okay, God, help me devise a plan where step by step, I'm going to do better. Let me be organized about being better. So I'll just tell you personally something that I'm doing. I'm a golfer, love the game. And after I play a round of golf, that night I'll lie in bed, and I'll replay every shot that I did that day and think, okay, like what was the theme today? That is something that I could work on. My irons were coming up short. My chipping was inadequate. I need to work on the chipping. Whatever it is, if I replay the shots, I can identify what I need to work on. Well, how much more should I replay the key moments of that day when I came home and I was in a bad mood and my wife came in the room and I wasn't as gracious as I could be, I like to call my dad regularly, especially on Fridays. Why do I have to wait till Friday? He's not the youngest man in the world anymore. I should call him now. I could have said hello to somebody in the street who's a neighbor, but I was busy, thinking about my work. Just things like that. The little moments in life, if you don't examine them, you're not going to improve. And if you do examine them, you will. So if I can do that for golf, The least I can do for my family, my neighbors, and my Lord is make such an examination while I'm lying in bed at night. It only takes a few minutes, and it'll make me a better man tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a great interview, and I really, again, encourage people to check out Guns N' Moses, which will be online, available somewhere October 14th. Where can people find it, and where can people find you if they're interested in hearing more great non-rabbinic but still very good wisdom from you and your team?
Thank you so much. The movie will be on all major platforms, Apple, Amazon, etc. But you can always get updates and learn more about its journey and see like some great behind the scenes footage and other stuff, comparisons to Chinatown, for example, on our website, gunsandmosesmovie.com, gunsandmosesmovie.com. You can always find me at salvadorlitvak.com. That's easy to remember. And our organization is called Accidental Talmudist. You just Google that. You'll send us to our website, accidentaltalmudist.org. I recommend people sign up for our always free weekly bulletin, where there's just beautiful short teachings from the Torah, always some Jewish humor. Here's my book, Let My People Laugh, greatest Jewish jokes of all time, bestseller on Amazon. Everybody loves a joke. Would you like to hear a joke, Joseph? Shall we go out with a joke? Everybody loves a joke. So at an interfaith conference, a rabbi and a priest and an imam are asked, what do you hope people will say about you at your funeral? So the imam says, I hope at my funeral they'll say that I put the needs of my congregation before my own. And the priest says, at my funeral, I hope they'll say, I extended my ministry beyond the walls of my church. And the rabbi says, at my funeral, I hope they'll say, look, he's moving.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Sal. Thank you all for listening. And remember, this is Religion Unplugged, your one-stop shop for all the best religious news and culture.